Assalamu alaikum everybody, welcome to my channel. This video will be a little bit different to the previous videos that I've done. I filmed a video on being single and being a Muslim, and in response to that, many people, specifically some married Muslim men, suggested a solution. They said that the answer to this problem of the modern day is polygamy, i.e. marrying somebody who's already married. As many people encourage or engage in this practice within the Muslim community, but also within the wider community in the sense of polyamory, I thought it would be important to do a deep dive and look into this subject further to see what the Qur'an has to say on this matter. As I'm Muslim, for me it's important that I follow what Allah has commanded in the Qur'an. What I found may surprise you. I'm going to give you 4 different interpretations of the verses. I literally had a look at every different perspective to see what everyone thinks on this matter, and I'm going to present those here. I definitely am leaning more towards one specific interpretation, which I might reveal later in the video, but ultimately it's your choice as to which opinion you decide that you want to agree with. You might not agree with any of these opinions. You might have your own opinion, and you are entitled to your opinion. But I'm just going to present here what I found. I collated a lot of information. I spoke to scholars. I listened to different scholarly opinions, and that's what I've collated in this video. But I would ask you to please be open-minded and truly, sincerely seek the guidance of Allah when you try to understand not only the verses about polygamy, but also verses about any other topic, on any other subjects, if you are Muslim. I'm sharing this knowledge out of a sense of moral duty, and also a duty to Allah, because I believe that if you have knowledge, if you gather knowledge, then you should share it if you can. So, keyboard warriors, if you have something to say, just try and think about what value you are adding to the conversation before you go and just put anything you want, the first thing that comes into your head, into the comment section. But I am encouraging discussion and debate because we should be talking about our religion. We should be discussing it. We should be understanding each other's perspectives. We are just humans at the end of the day. We are fallible. So when you come to discuss and you discuss openly, not only does it help to clarify a matter, but it also reinforces your belief and it makes you stronger in your religion. So let's look at this in a positive light and let's discuss and learn together in this video. Now, here are some reminders. I just want to start with this before we go deep into the subject. Do study the Qur'an mindfully and think for yourself. And this isn't coming from me, this is coming from Allah. This is what Allah says in the Qur'an. I put the verses in brackets. So, Surah 47, verse 24, Surah 4, verse 82, Surah 73, verse 4. All of the references in brackets where you see numbers like this throughout my presentation, they are references to the Qur'an. Now, I've tried to make this presentation as simple as possible. I'm going to try and explain everything in as simple language as possible because I want everybody to understand. Of course, if you have questions, then please feel free to put them in the comments below. Or if you don't agree with me, it's fine. I respect your opinion. That's fine. But this is my channel. And on my channel, I feel that this is my right to talk about topics that I want to talk about. So please respect that. So don't get angry if you're not agreeing with me. Remember, in the Quran, Allah has encouraged us to not get angry, to not be rude and not be harsh. Again, I put the references here, so you can find them in the Quran where it says that. And also importantly, do not side with the deceitful or mix truth with lies just because something that is factual doesn't agree with your personal opinion. So it's really important that we uphold justice, we uphold the truth as Muslims. I also want to say that even though these are scholarly opinions, some of the opinions that I'm sharing in this video are not going to be very popular. The first interpretation is the most popular one, and it will be the one that you're most accustomed to, but the others won't be. That doesn't mean that we should eliminate it and not not to consider it just because it's not the most popular opinion. In fact, in the Quran, it does mention in some places that people would often just follow their forefathers, or they would follow what the rabbis were saying. They would kind of idolize them. But that's not necessarily the right way. Allah encourages us to study the Quran mindfully, to ponder over the verses, to even think about Allah and His creation at night time when we're even lying on our sides. So all of these things are in the Quran. These are not my own opinion. This is coming from the Quran. And also, I just want to make it really clear that in this video, I am talking about the Quran. So all the knowledge that I've amassed here is from the Quran itself, not from any other sources, because I think it's really important that firstly we understand, what does the Quran say? And once we understand that properly, once we understand the core message, then we can look to other sources to help to consolidate our understanding if we wish, or if we just have a curiosity that we want to satiate by looking at other sources. But first we have to know very clearly and distinctly, what does the Quran say on a certain matter, and not let other influences influence the core commands of the Quran. So what does the Quran say about marriage? What does the Quran say? So before we go into that, let's just talk about marriage. Now, marriage can be beautiful for many reasons. It often represents a deep, committed partnership where both individuals support and grow with each other. The shared experiences, mutual respect, and emotional intimacy can create a strong foundation for a fulfilling life. Additionally, marriage can provide a sense of stability and security, and it often involves building a life together with shared goals and values. For many, the commitment and dedication in marriage symbolize a profound connection and love that is celebrated and nurtured over time. So, marriage serves a purpose to bring people together, to have that deep connection. What does Allah say about this? Now, Allah says, "People, be mindful of your Lord, who created you from a single soul, and from it created its mate, and from the pair of them spread countless men and women. Be mindful of Allah, in whose name you ask one another of what is in the womb. Allah is always watching over you." That's in Surah 4, that's Nisa, verse 1. So Allah has said that you are created from a single soul, and from it is created its mate. That one pairing is created together, as Allah has said here. Again, it says, "It is He who created you from one soul and created from it its mate, that He might dwell in security with her." Again, one pairing of a male and a female. "And of His signs is that He created for you from yourselves mates, that you may find tranquility in them. And He placed between you affection and mercy. Indeed, in that are signs for a people who give thought." Now, this is in Surah 30, verse 21. Now, here Allah is talking collectively about the people. In the other verses, He was talking to individuals. So I hope that makes sense. More verses. "O you who have believed, it's not lawful for you to inherit women by compulsion." So that's very clear in the Quran that no women can be forced to get married to somebody they don't wish to be married to. It doesn't matter who they are, what status they are, whether they're orphans, whether they're slaves, servants, whether they have less social status, they cannot be forced into marriage. Detailed laws on who and who can't be married is in the Quran. For example, 24:3, 4:23 to 25, 2 to 21. What you can do is you can pause the video if you want to go away and look at these verses. You can just pause it, and then you can have a look at these verses in more detail. I couldn't list every single verse that I'm referencing because I will be referencing a lot of verses of the Quran. But please feel free to go away and double check everything that I'm saying here. That is the best way, and we shouldn't be just blindly following anybody anyway. So please go away and check everything. Okay, the next thing is, it says in the Quran that we should try and stick to that marriage once a contract is placed. So there is encouragement to stick to a marriage, and there are verses here that you can look up. Divorce is an option, of course, but it's not encouraged in the Quran. So it shouldn't be the first port of call when there is any issue. In fact, there are many conditions that have to be met before a divorce can take place. So that's because the sanctity of marriage is a very serious matter in religion. In the Quran, is considered to be a sacred bond, and a bond that's once created should be respected. In the Quran, it says men are the protectors or the providers of women, and righteous women are protective of what Allah has entrusted them with. It also says they are a clothing for you, and you are a clothing for them. Okay, so what about monogamous marriage? Now, this is encouraged by Allah in the Quran, and it's encouraged for many reasons. Some of these that are listed are common sense things, but some of them are referenced to in the Quran. So quality over quantity, that could be one of the logical reasons that somebody would want to be in a monogamous marriage. And that would be because if you spend a lot of your time and effort with one person, then you're going to pour all of that into that one person rather than dividing it across multiple people. It means that if I have, for example, 5 hours of a day to give to somebody, I'm giving all of those 5 hours to that one person. I'm not dividing it by half. If I were to give, say, 2.5 hours, ultimately that's going to be 50% effort towards that one person. Originally, I would have given 100%, but now I'm giving 50%. So, this sort of quality is a good way to look at it, that this should be a quality relationship more than about how many you can amass or how many you can acquire. Deep and meaningful soulful connection. As I mentioned previously, this is one of the core things, one of the core beauties of marriage, that you can develop this bond and you can, sort of finish each of the sentences. You almost have that kind of soulmate connection. If it's a good match, then you would hope that you would be able to develop this deep and meaningful connection. Now, Adam had only one wife. I put this into a separate bullet point because arguably he was not considered to be a prophet, but he was the first man on earth. And he had only one wife. There's only one wife mentioned. And interestingly, I then went and looked at the other prophets to see if I could find any that had multiple wives only according to the Quran. So I'm not talking about hadith here. I'm not talking about the other sources. I'm talking about the Quran specifically. And it does say that the prophets, where they are mentioned, that they had the one wife is mentioned. So for example, Surah Nuh alayhi salam, Lut alayhi salam, Ibrahim alayhi salam, Zakaria alayhi salam, Musa alayhi salam, all of them, when they are mentioned in the Quran and when their wife is mentioned along with them, it literally says, wife. It does not say wives, it says wife. And in two of these cases, Ibrahim alayhi salam and Zakaria alayhi salam, both of them were granted children in old age. Their wives were old too. And it does say wife. So it doesn't say that they married another wife and that she was much younger so that she could bear children. Specifically, it says that they, especially with Zakaria, I remember this really clearly, that his wife was old and he was old, and Allah still granted them a child. Emotional and physical availability of both parents for each other and children, like I mentioned before, about quality over quantity. Now, the benefit of having a monogamous marriage also is that you are going to be fully emotionally available for not just that one wife, but also for the entire family. Now, the reason I'm mentioning here wife, and I'm not talking about it husbands, is because in the Quran and in Islam in general, we don't believe in polyandry. We believe in polygyny, or like traditionally, I'm talking about the traditional belief is polygyny. My personal belief is a little different, and I'll explain in the video the different interpretations, but we don't believe in polyandry, and there isn't really, I don't think that's a subject for debate, whereas polygyny is. So the focus here is all on polygyny. Now, then you also have time for individual and collective pursuits. Because you are more available, you can focus on yourself and you can focus on collective pursuits with the family. You can look at how you can serve your community, society at large. If you have multiple households, then you probably won't have any spare time to give to such endeavors. You probably won't have time for charity, you probably won't have time for projects with NGOs or, any community projects the way that you would if you just had the one pairing. And this is also the natural and healthy way. The reason I say this is because, this is coming from common sense, but there isn't a man on earth that I know of or I have met or, someone who I would consider to be fully sane, he would be happy for a wife that he truly loves to go and marry an additional husband and to be shared with the other husband. Likewise, there isn't a woman that I can think of who would like to have her husband go and marry somebody else and to share that husband with somebody else. It does a lot of emotional damage. And Allah, He was so kind and merciful, and He cares about each person's feelings, and He clearly demonstrates that in the Qur'an when He's asking people to communicate with each other in gentle manner, to be kind, to be caring, to not hurt them, to not say anything that could offend somebody else. Allah cares about our emotional well-being, and it's very, very clear in the Qur'an. And if He cares so much about our well-being, then I can't see how He would encourage somebody to go and get emotionally hurt or to emotionally hurt somebody else. Security, emotionally, physically, financially. In marriage, in one pairing, you have security. You know that that person is going to be emotionally available for you. That person you're married to, your spouse, that this person will be physically available for you only, and that they will be financially invested in you only. It's you and your household. You're not sharing it across multiple households. Now, the other reason can also be because often I've heard this, that people think that because there are in some communities more women than men, or this is just a perception that they may have, that this is a basis of polygamy or polygyny. However, when I looked into it, I saw that globally there are actually slightly more men than women. Here you can see for 22 years, from 2000 to 2022, there are actually slightly more men. So that's the blue line that you see. The women are the black line, and you can see on the y-axis the population in billions. Now, this is from a website that I'm going to reference at the end, statista.com. But there are a few other websites which report the same thing. Again, feel free to go away and look at it. Now, let's talk about polygamy. What are the benefits of polygamy? And why do people do this? So there can be many reasons why people do this. Sometimes there are reasons of emotional and social needs, where, for example, men might be seeking multiple partners to meet various emotional or social needs that they feel are unmet in their current relationship. They might want some variety and novelty, where men seek multiple partners to experience the variety and novelty, which can be exciting, stimulating. And this desire for new experiences can be driven by personal preferences or a search for fulfillment. There can be cultural and social influences, cultural norms, and social environments can influence attitudes towards having multiple partners. And in some cultures, having multiple partners is more accepted or even encouraged. So that can also shape individual desires. Because if you believe that this is normal or it's encouraged or this is, a biological driven response, then you're more likely to be driven to believe that you should be acting out a certain way, or that you should be doing something that perhaps you wouldn't be doing if the message was the opposite that you had been receiving. Relational dynamics as well. In relationships where one partner feels unsatisfied or unfulfilled, they might seek additional partners as a way to address these issues, though this approach can lead to complex dynamics and potential conflicts. And then there's also personal fulfillment and identity, which could be that some men may feel that having multiple partners may be associated with a sense of personal accomplishment or identity, which could be linked to their self-esteem or social status. So these are some of the reasons why, but I've also added a few more reasons here. Some people might feel that they want to have more children, and so they think that this is a reason to have a multiple wives, or maybe they don't have any children and they think that this is a justified reason to have another wife. Some people may believe that this is an easy way to solve the marriage crisis, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, that if a woman is saying that she's struggling to get married, instead of helping her to find somebody to get married to, and maybe speaking on the behalf of that woman to the imam or to friends that he might have that are single, he thinks that he can just offer himself to that woman in marriage. And then another really common reason is that it's sunnah. Now, I find this one really interesting because there is a bit of debate on this topic as well, that some people believe that Muhammad ﷺ did not have more than one wife at one time. He had multiple marriages, but not necessarily that they were all with him at one time. So there is some debate on that. But also, what's really interesting to me is that when Allah clearly encourages in the Qur'an monogamy as the norm, why people want to ignore that and focus on what they believe is the sunnah. Allah's word comes first and foremost. And then the other interesting point is that some people completely disregard that another sunnah is that Khadija, radiallahu anha, she's believed to be 15 years or so older than the Prophet ﷺ, yet men do not usually consider women with such an age gap who was so much older. Sometimes even if they're just 1 year older, they won't agree with it. But that's also sunnah. So it's kind of, cherry picking sunnah, which is interesting to me. Now, there are some cons to polygamy, which I think are really important to mention, especially for the women that are watching this video. They should know why simply doing a nikah could not work in their favor in the long term, for example. They do that usually because in places like the UK and many Western countries, polygamy is actually illegal. It's considered to be a crime because it's illegal. So, there are no legal obligations of that husband towards his wife. So if they were to go to a court, the marriage wouldn't even be recognized for them to have any rights from that marriage. So for example, if they were to get divorced, then they couldn't really go to a court for settlement. Also, I think it's really important to bear in mind that a lot of Quranic verses are commonly interpreted out of context. This specific one that we will be focusing on today, there is one specific one, is Surah 4, verse 3. And we'll focus on this one, but this is not the only one. There are many others that are subject to debate. And as I mentioned before, another disadvantage of polygamy is the emotional harm to wives and children. And I think that one shouldn't be undermined and it shouldn't be understated, because this is a real issue in the vast majority of these marriages. Women who live overseas cannot come to live here in the UK. I'm going to be talking about the UK because that's where I live, so I'm more familiar with the laws. If that woman's husband already has a wife here in the UK, she cannot just come here through the marriage contract and stay here, because he's already married and only one marriage is legally accepted here. That means her housing benefit and council tax benefit entitlement is also going to be hindered. Not just that woman, but say if a woman here is marrying a man who's already married, then she won't get the housing benefit and council tax benefit. This is limited to those who are living in one property. So a second wife in a second home won't be entitled to housing and council tax benefits. If a man leaves behind two widows, there is no bereavement benefit to either of the wives. And also, polygamy is illegal, so as I said, it would be punishable in a UK court. Now, I got most of this information from the House of Commons Library. They have a document called Polygamy. That's where I got it from. I'm also going to reference that at the end, so you can have a look at where that is, where it's from, and find it yourself and read more if you want to learn more about it. Now, before I go on to this, I do want to just continue on the topic of polygamy and monogamy and just say that, in monogamy, there are many reasons why, other than the ones that I stated, why some people would choose to be in a monogamous relationship. And those additional reasons are social stability, economic stability. Social stability is the one I think I didn't mention. Monogamous relationships are often seen as contributing to social stability by creating clear family structures and responsibilities, which can be important for raising children and maintaining social order. So that's another one that I just wanted to touch on because I think I didn't mention that before. Now, as I said, I'm going to touch on four interpretations, okay? So this is the one that is the most common. This is the one that you've probably heard of. You might not have heard of any of the others, or you might have heard of just a few of the others. But in this one, this is Surah 4, verse 3. And if you fear that you will not deal justly with the orphan girls, then marry those that please you of other women, 2 or 3 or 4. But if you fear that you will not be just, then marry only one or those your right hand possesses. That is more suitable, that you may not incline to injustice. Now, it's important to realize that what's in the brackets there is interpretation. So those words are not from the Qur'an. Those words have been added to create the interpretation of that verse. So for example, that word other women, other is not in the Quran, it just says women. And here where it says in brackets, marry only, that's also been added, etc. So that is important to remember, that this happens a lot in translations of the Quran, where you will find that words that are in brackets don't match up with the Arabic because they are not in the Arabic to begin with. So according to this interpretation, the popular interpretation, there is some debate about permission. Some people believe that permission from the existing wife is required. Some people believe that it's not required. But pretty much everyone who believes in this interpretation believes that a man is entitled to marry any women of his choice, 2, 3, or 4 women, and it's any women. However, as I mentioned, this is illegal in many countries, and there are conditions in other countries. So some countries will allow you to marry another woman, but you have to meet certain conditions, such as you have to present a reason such as you don't have a child and you want a child, or that you've had permission from your first wife. Now, the intention could be to recruit a few wives to look after multiple orphans. This is actually not one that I see regularly. I don't see this as a justification, but this could be the justification that, the intention might be to have other wives, additional wives, to look after orphans in the case where you are, for example, running almost like an orphanage in your home where you have multiple orphans, lots of orphans, and you might need help to look after them, to raise the children. So you can marry any women who can help you with that. But the most commonly, this is translated in a way that seems to serve a man's personal satisfaction, his desire, for example, that he may feel that he wants more wives to satisfy his desire. He's not satiated by one wife. And here I just want to mention something that's really important. On this subject of desire is often understood socially in many cultures, not just in the Arab or Eastern cultures, but in many cultures it's sort of socially understood that women don't have as much desire as men. However, the Qur'an, in its infinite wisdom, actually presents, the Qur'an is where Allah is talking to us directly. So Allah is communicating with us through this book. So we really should see it as that this is Allah talking to us, and we should try and understand what He is communicating with us. And a lot of the verses are not that difficult to understand. They're quite easy, and Allah wants us to follow what we can understand, and any that we can't understand, that we speak to people of knowledge to understand. People of knowledge might not necessarily be rabbis, scholars, they are not mentioned in that way. So it's just people that have knowledge. And actually, very interesting, I'm just sort of diverging a little bit, but digressing. But there is a really important point that I want to mention just because it's popped into my head. But Khidr, the person who's called Khidr, the one who Musa alayhi salam followed, he was not a prophet. He was just an ordinary man. Even though prophets, Allah tells us, were just ordinary humans as well. But he, Khidr was a man who Musa alayhi salam followed because he looked up to him in a way. He knew that this person's guided. He wants to see what he does, how he spends his life, like what good he's doing. So you don't necessarily have to be an enlightened saint. To be able to understand the Qur'an, you can understand the Qur'an just by using your intellect and by seeking the guidance that's within it. So now coming back to men's desire. So in the Qur'an, it says very clearly that in the story of Yusuf alayhi salam, that there was a married woman, and she was a rich woman, influential woman, and she tried to seduce Yusuf alayhi salam. So she was married, so she should have been satiated, should have been happy that she's got somebody to turn to fulfill her physical desires, but she still tried to seduce Yusuf alayhi salam. So it's not just men who have desires or that they have such greater desires than women. Actually, the Qur'an tells us a different story. The Qur'an tells us that we are much more alike, men and women, than we are given credit for. Also, the desire being the premise or the primary motivation of a marriage, is not endorsed in the Qur'an. And this will be clearer when I'm explaining the other interpretations. In the Qur'an, it's very clear the categories of people to whom marriage is permissible. These clear verses about who and who cannot be married are given for the general believers, and then there are even some specific verses that applied for Prophet Muhammad ﷺ about the categories of people that he could marry. Now, those that were for the general population, it says things like you cannot marry the polytheists, you cannot marry the fornicators. If you are believers, true believers who follow the Qur'an, stay away from haram, then you can't marry these people. And you can't marry mahram, such as your brothers and fathers. And also that those who don't have the means to marry must remain chaste. Okay, now that's the first interpretation. Now it's going to get a bit more interesting because the ones that I'm going to present now are not that common. Okay, so in this interpretation, the translation reads very similar to the one that I gave before, so I'm not going to read it out again. However, the difference here is that in this interpretation, it's understood that only orphans can be married. So not that any women can be married, only the women that have grown up, the orphans that have grown up, and they've become women, they've matured as women, and only they can be married. So that's this interpretation. So it's not for lust, but for proper care and protection, because the whole surah pretty much is talking about orphans. Allah really cares about orphans and people that are oppressed, people that are in need, disadvantaged people. Allah has all the care and concern for these people, and He wants us to look after them, to care for them, to treat them nicely, kindly, fairly. So this is, this verse, according to this interpretation, is not about having another wife for any other reason but to take care of orphans. However, the con I would say to this interpretation is that the guardians, they might be much older than these orphans, and they might be sort of parental figures to these orphans as well. These orphans might not wish to marry them because, as we know, these women cannot be forced into a marriage. No women can be forced into a marriage according to the Qur'an. But they might feel that these guardians, if they're much older and they're wealthy men, for example, who are looking after them, they might not feel comfortable to marry these guardians, but they might feel pressured to. So that would be a con, I'd say, of this interpretation. And still, even if you were to marry multiple orphans, this would still be illegal in many countries. And also another point to consider is that if a man is, say he's looking after 10 orphans, and he marries 4 to be equitable with them, to kind of help with the with the bond or with the sort of guardian to orphan bond, then what about the remaining 6? So if there are 10 orphans, 4 are married to this man, what about the remaining 6 that are under his care? So logically, there is this flaw that I see. Those 6 remaining may not be treated fairly because he can't marry anymore. I hope this is making sense. If any part of it is not making sense, then feel free to ask in the comments below. I did spend quite a bit of time collating all this information, but this is not something I've written a thesis on. So I'm really just trying my best to convey what I have learned, just to sort of kickstart this conversation. Now, this interpretation is also based on the premise that in a war-torn society in 7th century Arabia, one which left many women widowed and children orphaned, the discussion of polygamy was revealed as part of a directive to treat female orphans justly. So polygamy should be viewed as a component of justice in the treatment of widows, but it's mainly conditioned upon the need to offer fair care to orphans. As mentioned in this verse, it served a functional purpose for that time period in allowing widows and orphans to be taken care of in a society in which women usually did not have independent means of financial support. But the text is clear that polygamy is only permissible if all of the wives are treated justly. And then the Qur'an goes on to say that it will never be possible for a husband to treat all of his wives fairly. Now, this is not my interpretation. This is according to this interpretation here. This interpretation is from islamicity.com. And the title of the article is A Quranic Perspective on Polygamy. Now, it's interesting actually that the word widows I've not found it in the Quran, the word for widows. I've seen that widows are often described as being wives that are left behind. And I think that's also an indication of Allah's mercy, that He's not labeling these women as widows. That can be quite a difficult label emotionally to accept. I know that because my mum is one, and it sort of hurts to be labeled as a widow. So it's just interesting. That's just a side note that I wanted to mention. Now, there is a lot more to this article, but I'm going to reference it at the end, so then you can find out a lot more about where this interpretation is coming from. Now, there is a really interesting note here. Often orphans are believed to be those that don't have a father, but who may have a mother. Now, organizedquran.com has actually written a really interesting explanation of how they disagree with this notion, and that orphans are actually those who don't have mothers either. So they have neither mothers nor fathers. I'm going to read out what they've said. Now, they've said that the words in Surah 4, verse 6, address the guardians who are entrusted with the duty of looking after the money of orphans until such a day when they are mature enough for their money to be handed over to them. For a child to be in need of a guardian means that he has lost both parents. The following analysis confirms that a child who has a living mother is not classed as an orphan in the Book of God. Now they say, if a child's mother is still alive, she would be the most trustworthy person to look after all his interests, including his money. Therefore, there would not be a need for a guardian to look after the money of the child. That's point one. Point two is that some may suggest that the instructions of handing the orphans their money at maturity applies also to their mother, if she is looking after their money. However, the words in 4:6 cannot be addressed to a mother who was looking after the money of her own child. For if that was the case, God would not need to issue the warning, do not consume it, i.e. the orphan's money, wastefully. A mother is not likely to squander the money of her own child wastefully. The third point is that equally, if a child has a living mother and she happens to be looking after his money, God will not say the words, those who are rich shall not charge any wage, and whoever is poor can charge equitably, because mothers do not charge a fee for looking after the money of their own children. Children who have a living mother would not need a guardian. Therefore, the orphans that are spoken of in 4:6 cannot have living mothers. Orphans are children who've lost both parents. It follows that the interpretation of marrying the mothers of orphans is an option that cannot exist, simply because orphans do not have mothers. Now, it's interesting, this point, because the third interpretation assumes that you can do polygamy, but the women must be the mothers of orphans. And this is on the premise of, if the children are not allowed to get married because they're not mature enough, because Allah has said that you must be a mature age to be married, and at an age when you can be responsible for the household and for the running of the house and your finances, etc., then naturally this verse cannot mean that you can marry orphans because they're still children. So therefore it must mean that you marry their mothers. They are more likely to be age appropriate. However, this setup would still be illegal in many countries because it's still a polygamous marriage. So, this cannot be legally recognized as civil marriage. And that orphan definition is debatable. Orphans may not have living mothers, as the orphans are under guardianship. If they're under guardianship, then it probably means that their mothers are not alive. Otherwise, they would be under the guardianship of their mothers rather than somebody who is not their mother or father. So this is also an interesting one. Now, the argument for this interpretation for this, the one of the mothers of orphans, is actually in QuranicPath.com. This is actually one of the first interpretations that I came across when I was looking into this subject a few years ago. And I was partly convinced by it at the time, but there was something that wasn't quite adding up, so I wasn't too sure. But this is on QuranicPath.com. I've referenced it at the end as well with the name of the article, which is Polygamy to Mothers of Orphans Only. And there you can see this explanation, this interpretation in a lot more depth. Now I'm going to move on to the fourth interpretation. And I'm doing that because, just looking through the information that they have given in QuranicPath.com, it's actually the same. Many of the points are the same as what we have discussed previously about, being equitable, being fair, and regarding the other words that are in the verse. So now moving on to the fourth interpretation. This one is very interesting, and I just came across this one a few days ago, and I was very taken aback by this one. It took me a while, a few days, maybe 4 or 5 days, to sit down and really ponder this one through. And then I referenced it with many of the verses in the Qur'an. I spoke to a scholar about this afterwards too, and he also thinks that this could be a viable interpretation of this verse. Now, what is this interpretation? This interpretation, just to reference the right person, is from Tanner Demercy Lopez. He's a professor of religious studies. I saw this one on his YouTube channel, and then I actually found an article on the internet on another website which talks about this in more depth, in similar depth to the professor, and consolidates this interpretation. So what does he say? He says that actually the whole translation has been wrong, and he's got good reasons actually. I'll go through it and I'll explain why I think there are good reasons to believe that this is the case. He says that if you translate it word for word, it says wa in kiftum, if you fear. Allah tuksitu means you will be able to do justice, i.e. when they're under your care. Fil yatama, with the orphans. Fankihu, now this is a key word here. He says this does not mean that you marry the orphans. It means then marry them off. Marry off the orphans when they are women, when they mature. Matabalakum, what seems suitable to you, marry them off in a way that seems suitable to you. Minan nisa, from the women amongst the orphans. Mathna wa thulatha wa ruba. He says that this means 2s, 3s, 4s, and not 2, 3, or 4. So it's not that you marry 2, 3, or 4 wives. It means that you marry them off in 2s, 3s, or 4s, meaning you marry them off in mass if you can. If you cannot be equitable amongst them, if you cannot be equitable among the orphans because you're not able to give them what is rightfully theirs, or you are not able to do justice between them, you're not able to look after them properly, you're neglecting them, or you're not taking care of their needs like clothing or food, etc., then marry those women off to those whom you deem suitable in 2s, 3s, or 4s. But if you are afraid that you will not be able to be just with them, then marry only one off, or your bondswoman. In the Quran, there's lots of messaging around freeing slaves and a lot of encouragement around that. So bondswoman I put here as a word that means somebody who you're managing under contract, or it could possibly be slave, or a captive. Now, I'd just like to say, this explanation is more socially acceptable. I'd say, this would be legal for somebody, for a guardian, to marry off these children according to their permission, of course. But this is socially acceptable. This would be legal, and this is quite a nice interpretation in terms of it's easy for the vast majority of people to accept this interpretation, rather than accepting that their husband could marry multiple women. This is easier. Now, I want to go in it a bit more deeply because there's a lot to say on this one. I found quite a bit of information, so let's go through it. Okay. So in 425, Surah 4, verse 25, it says, "But if any of you cannot afford to marry a free believing woman, then a believing slave possessed by one of you." In that one, it does not say that you can marry the slaves 2, 3, or 4, or that you can, it says very clearly that if you cannot afford to marry a free believing woman, then you can marry a slave, one slave here in 425. I think this is somewhat comparable to this verse because there is also a condition that if you cannot be justice, if you cannot be equitable, then you can marry off the orphans. So likewise in 425, if you cannot do something correctly, as in you cannot afford to marry a free believing woman and provide for her, then you can have one. So the whole point of these verses is to make things easier for you, to help you with something, rather than creating more burden by encouraging multiple marriages with more additional responsibilities. There is another verse, 1140, where it says in that verse, "Min kulli zawjaini," that's a part of the verse. That means a pair from every species. So here, where it's a matter of survival at Noah's time, when there was a flood and he had to bring together a pair from every species onto his ship, there is a mention of just one pair of each species, not 4 females to 1 male of any single species, or multiple of one gender with the other gender. That's just not mentioned. So I thought that was an interesting point. Pedophilia is actually not endorsed in the Qur'an at all. It says that children have to be mature, to treat them well, to look after them, to be their guardians in the proper manner. They have their rights. Orphans have rights. And in fact, in Surah 4, verse 127, it says, "Allah instructs you regarding the orphans, the women who are not treated equitably, the helpless children, and orphans' rights." That's in Surah 4, 127. So, pedophilia is not endorsed at all. It's not okay for a man, a guardian, to go and marry someone who's a child or much younger than him. The partner should be age appropriate, and she should be giving her permission to marry as well. On the point of then marry the women off, fa ankehu, then marry off ankehu, there is another verse that uses this word ankehu, and that is 24:32. In that verse it says, "Marry off the singles among you, as well as the righteous of your male and female servants. If they are poor, Allah will enrich them out of his bounty." Now it says it can't mean marry in that verse. It's translated as marry off, because you can't, as a male, marry the male servants. In that verse it says, "Marry off the singles among you, as well as the righteous of your male and female servants." It does not say just the female servants. Now, if we come back to the verse of 4:3, it does mention women, but the reason is because women get married off by their families. Men don't need to have the support of their families to marry them off, meaning financially, and physically they don't need to have that. They can marry from their own resources. But the women needed, and still to this day, there are women that need help to get married, or they depend on the man that they are marrying with them to provide the finances for the marriage. So this is a really interesting one, that there in that verse, that word ankihu is translated as marry off. But here it's usually translated in 4:3, it's usually translated as marry. On a similar note, there are a couple of other verses that explain the 2s, 3s, and 4s. It's not 2 or 3 or 4. It's not ithnain, thalatha, and arba'a. The words are different. It's 2s, 3s, and 4s. So in Surah 34, verse 6, it says, "Say, I advise you to do one thing, that you stand to God in 2s, mathna, and individually." So the same word is used there, mathna, and it's translated as 2s. "I advise you to do one thing, that you stand to God in 2s and individually, then reflect." Just as mathna is used in this verse, 4:3 is used there, and it means in 2s. Now there is another verse, Surah 35, verse 1, which says, "Praise be to God, initiator of the heavens and the earth, makers of the angels and messengers, with wings of 2s, 3s, and 4s. So the exact same wording is used there as is used here for 2s, 3s, and 4s. And over there it's talking about the pairs of wings of angels. All species that fly, that have wings, come in pairs. You can't have 3 wings. So this is also mentioned there. I think it's a very good point, where it says that if you are afraid that you will not be able to be just with them, then marry only one off. That means that if you cannot afford to arrange more than one wedding at a time because it might be too difficult to do practically or financially, then marry only one off. This is my understanding of this part of the verse, and also the understanding that I've heard from others too. Another point that's really important to mention is that this verse finishes off, 4:3 finishes off with, "Then marry only one of your bondswomen. That is more appropriate so that you don't oppress them." Marry them off so that you don't oppress them. So the whole idea here is to how best to look after the orphans, make sure that they are treated fairly. And also this verse that I mentioned just before, 24:32, it says, "Marry off the singles amongst you." So clearly Allah is saying, marry off the singles. So this is the encouragement within Qur'an, that you don't marry married people, you marry off the singles, you help the singles to get married to other singles. The reason I mention that this is really important is because, for example, if I were told by my parents when I'm a child that I can only have one chocolate, they say to you, have one chocolate, and I go and I have 10, then I'm sort of pushing it, aren't I? Maybe that's not the best example, but there is clearly encouragement of monogamous marriages in the Qur'an. Allah mentions that when you wish to marry another wife, it's through substitution, not addition. So for example, in Surah 4, verse 20, it says, "If you wish to marry another wife in place of your present wife, and you had given any of them a great deal, you shall not take back anything you had given to her." Now it says in place of your present wife, not in addition to. There are more verses that say the same, have the same messaging. So you could say here that Allah is re-emphasizing to the Prophet the rule that he has decreed in 4:20, which is substitution, not addition. God is telling him that he is only allowed to be involved with one woman from amongst the ones that he likes. He has to go through separation to be with whoever he wishes to marry from, or to retract a previous separation. Reference 33:51. Then he is told that he is not allowed to marry from all the other categories, nor is he allowed to substitute an existing wife with any woman of those categories in 33:52. So the emphasis is on substitution, not addition. This makes the rule for all believers in 420 applicable to him with no exception. I should also mention that where it says at the beginning of this surah, Surah An-Nisa, it starts with Ya ayyuhan nas, not Ya ayyuhar rijal. So it's important to note that these verses at the beginning of Surah An-Nisa are not about marriage. They're about the institution of looking after orphans. And they're not about marriage. They're not introducing new rules about marriage in those verses. In Surah 4 verse 6, it says, test the orphans until they reach a marriageable age. Then if you feel they are capable of sound judgment, return their wealth to them. And do not consume it wastefully and hastily before they grow up. If the guardian is well off, they should not take compensation. But if the guardian is poor, let them take a reasonable provision from it. When you give orphans back their property, call in witnesses, and sufficient is Allah as a reckoner. So here it's talking again about orphans that wait until they get to a marriageable age before you return their wealth to them. All these verses are about looking after orphans. And it's not about just marrying whoever you want to marry or, laws for the general population and that they can just marry multiple wives. And this is not mentioned there. Okay, so what's in common between all of the interpretations that we have seen? The context. It is about the care of orphans. Fairness, kindness, and compassion are non-negotiables in these verses. It's clear that orphans have to be treated with respect, compassion, fairness, justice. Orphans are mentioned 23 times in the Qur'an. This is how much Allah is drawing our attention to them. We are encouraged to look after them, to care for them, to look out for them. Forced marriages, including of those of orphans and slaves, are forbidden. So these are the shared beliefs that are across all interpretations of this verse. In summary, polyandry is forbidden, so only polygyny, i.e. marrying multiple wives, is a topic of debate. And these were the 4 interpretations that I walked through. The first one being the common one, which is that marriage is allowed to any woman, either with or without permission, depending on a person's individual beliefs, from the existing wife. The second one is that marriage is allowed to orphan women only. The third one is that marriage is allowed to mothers of orphans only. And the fourth one is that the guardian is responsible for marrying off orphans when they grow up. I'd love to hear what you think, which interpretation sits right with you. Please do take some time to go away and look into the information that I've shared. Like I said, it took me a long time to actually digest everything that I've shared here, to hear out every perspective, to understand it, to comprehend it. I had to think really deeply and compile a lot of information. So please do take some time to go away and think about everything that has been shared here. And if you need any clarification, feel free to ask me in the comments. If you have any well thought out comments to add to this discussion, then please do leave them in the comment section below. I'd love to see some really smart comments below. So please do share them. And these are the resources that I've put together, that I've used. A lot of it I was citing throughout the course of this video. They're all here, so feel free to, pause and look up these articles and sources of information. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. If this video has been helpful to you, please share it with somebody who it can also help. And please subscribe so you can see more videos. If you want more videos on other topics in the Quran, then feel free to ask me for those. And inshallah, I'll see you next time.